Hello boys and girls, long time no see, I hope you're doing well. Coming at you today with an ultra spicy one. A fair warning, it's a tad on the long side, but I'm confident you can handle it. Ready? Let's go! Let me ask you this. In making a realistic game, what responsibility does a developer have to be true to its source material? Is it just about content? What about the outcomes and player behaviors? Now, to explore this topic, let's use something completely off the cuff. Let's say Company A makes a basketball game, and they make it so that players are able to nail shots on the court from any location with a rather high degree of accuracy. Let's say within the paint, 100%, within the three-point line, 95%, just beyond the three-point line, 93%, within half court, 92%, and everywhere else, 90%. How would that affect things? Sure, it'd still be a basketball game. Players still have to dribble, make passes, follow the overall rules and structure of the game. There's still a ball and 2 goals, still 5 players from each team on the court at the same time. And yet, it probably wouldn't play out anything like a real basketball game. Players would inbound the ball and immediately shoot it, or they'd take 1 step over the half-court line and send it flying. Boom, they nail it, 3 points. And the next time, boom, they nail it, 3 points, over and over and over. And let's say that after watching things play out, the Company A goes a bit further. They say, this is cool and all, but this is just too slow. Let's increase the flight speed a bit for the ball. And let's make players run a lot faster. Okay? That way people don't have to watch the ball flying through the air for so long after each shot. And that way, if players want to move the ball up the court a bit, drive into the paint or whatever, they don't have to wait as long to get there. Okay, so that's setting the stage, right? But is it fair to say this game is realistic? That may be stretching it a bit. I mean, sure, it does color within the lines in a lot of ways. The court sizes, the goal heights, the rules, the teams, the players. But the creative liberties they've taken with the shooting accuracy, the movement speeds, and ball speeds, all this is clearly over the top. Now let's say another company comes in, Company B, to do its thing. Except they're gunning for the Realism crowd. So they overhaul the accuracy to better reflect real-world performance. And again, I'm just making up numbers here, so bear with me. Let's say within the paint, 92%. Within the three-point line, 64%. Just beyond the three-point line, 48%. Within half-court, 30%. And everywhere else, 2%. They slow down the player speeds to mimic the gaits of real players. They make the ball travel at reasonable speeds. All that kind of jazz. And they find that the way players approach the game more or less resembles how people really play it. They run plays, they set screens, they move the ball around to find openings. So is this realistic? Well, seems to be. After all, they're doing their best to reference real basketball footage and coming up with their algorithms and stuff like that. Now let's have a third company enter this wacky example. Company C comes along and does its thing, except they're wanting to shake things up a bit. They like what Company B did, but they just find it a bit too hemmed in and straight-laced. So they keep the same based-on-reality stuff from Company B's game, but with a twist. The standard shot performance is able to be influenced by the players. You want to nail those three-pointers more often? Well, now you can, through a series of dexterous keyboard and mouse inputs. You see, if the player clicks his mouse to the tune of "Here Comes the Bride" as he takes a shot, the accuracy increases by 75%. That's making it rain. And it doesn't stop there, because you see, if he taps out an accurate Morse code rendition of Nikita's "We will be the blin." We will be it increases by 1,000%. This is basically anywhere he takes the shot, it's practically a guaranteed Drano. So the game releases, and it goes gangbusters. Players have never seen anything like it. All around the world, players are memorizing key presses and mouse clicks to their favorite songs and one-off memes. It's insane. It's complete pandemonium. A whole slew of games is made building on these same player-driven mechanics. The landscape is forever changed. No one can imagine playing a game without these types of tricks. What is it? Would anyone looking on say it's realistic? Probably not. However, at this stage, it seems the target audience doesn't really care if it's realism or not realism. You see, the purpose and role of the game has changed. Rather than give players a glimpse for a day in the life for what it's like to actually play basketball, this gaming era is all about competition. It's now about creating a vehicle that lets players best each other in the most eye-catching, ego-driven ways. Now, do you ever see kids play? I mean, go back in time when you're in your bedroom playing with your G.I. Joes or whatever. You've got them all lined up in different poses and postures helping to set the scene. You walk your main guy in to give a speech just before you leave to take out the big bad enemy. And just before the grand battle kicks off, your little brother comes crashing in with his own action figure, swooping in from the sky, and within the span of 10 seconds completely decimates your forces. What the heck, you say? You can't do that. You can't just fly in here. The base is miles underground. You've got to take the elevator. The little brother persists. Who cares? I'm a superhero. You can't tell me what to do. Zap, boom, blast as he shoots lasers from his eyes. Okay, not to be outdone by such stupidity, the big brother jumps in. Oh yeah? Well, my guy has a force field. He blocks your attacks. Oh yeah, we'll block this. This slime eats through your force field and covers your dude, burning through his armor. I mean, on and on they go, constantly trying to one-up each other with more and more fantastic feats and abilities. And to what end? When does it stop? You see, it all started when the little brother broke the rules. Rather than respect the laws of physics and take the elevator, he defied time and space and simply flew in past miles of rock and earth. And from there, it all spun out of control. Limitations and constraints are what keep players honest. Creating a plausible representation of realism may have more to do with what the player is not allowed to do, rather than what he is allowed to do. If we look at a flight sim like DCS or BMS, can a player pull a 15G hairpin turn out of a nosedive while corkscrewing and loosing bombs over his target? Sure, he can try, but his plane would be ripped to shreds, cutting his little escapade short. Due to how the game is structured, there are plausible real-world consequences carried out in how things are represented to the player. There's a certain level of player agency, sure, but the underlying purpose of the game is to model and represent things so that these behaviors return a fairly believable what-if scenario back to the player. In the same way, then, I feel the supposed realistic FPS genre as a whole has lost its way a bit by having the standard be more about content. Oh wow, they have a heckler and coke, while completely neglecting any sort of even cursory judgment toward player behaviors and acceptable performance windows. To me, a game that claims to be realistic, that allows players to regularly and consistently outshoot trained professionals, is broken. It's an indication that something is wrong with what's going on under the hood. Now don't hear me wrong. I'm not advocating for some form of all-out realism, no compromises. Because guess what? When we are confined to a mouse and a keyboard and a monitor, when we have to deal with the cold, hard logic that comes with the ones and zeros of algorithms, concessions must be made. Things must be abstracted out. On the EFT forums, Tobias has some excellent comments on this as well, about how we're ultimately dealing with a fake facsimile of reality, and I wholeheartedly agree with his sentiments here. But it needs to be grounded in something, and preferably something other than supposed realistic movies. Let's take our boy Keanu here as an example. Here's a quick montage I put together, showcasing how reality often differs from the fake scenarios we devise for competitions. It's called Hero versus Uhoh. The point I'm making here is that, yes, while those can be good for stressing and refining certain fundamentals, standing and delivering is a far cry from how a person should train for real-life situations. In keeping with the basketball analogy, they're as different as shooting free throws versus overcoming an aggressive defense. We need to make the game-winning shot. I mean, it's the reason why some of the greats have penned some wonderful works, why entry teams regularly train together, why this stuff plays out differently in how it looks and how it moves. It's because when your own butt's on the line in a life and death situation, and you are confined by reality, it becomes more about respecting odds and probabilities than relying on raw skill. Because just like we saw with our boy Keanu up there, it's damn near impossible to razzle-dazzle your way out of a situation where the deck is strongly stacked against you. Now, to bring it back to the topic at hand, games regularly make a lot of assumptions. Foot speed, jump height, carry weight, reload speeds, on and on and on. There is one area, however, that gives up a lot of ground to the player, and that is an accuracy performance. And this is where things get tricky. Because while most players are okay and see no problem with the game dictating movement speeds, reload speeds, jump heights, all that kind of stuff, the one area that some players want a greater level of control is in shot placement and accuracy. Yet this one concession in this one area is what breaks the bank because it strongly incentivizes games to make full auto spray patterns much too tight. Why? Like we saw in the basketball example, it's so the player can override plausible reality and inject his own level of, quote, skill. And how is that done in FPS games? It's with a sort of mouse movement mini-game. After each shot, the weapon's point of aim will drift upward by a certain amount. In order to keep the weapon on target, then, the player needs to actively move his mouse downward to counteract this motion. This is something I'll call always-up recoil. But always-up recoil is the best we have, some will say. At creating a mechanic players can compete over, sure, maybe so. At creating realistic outcomes, no. Because once that mechanic is mastered by a bunch of no-lifers, what happens then?
We will be the блин. We will be
For this reason, it seems to me that a proper recoil system relies on blooms more than rises. It focuses on how widely the shot pattern displaces from the central point of aim. This is what provides a sort of safeguard to player performance and helps prevent a subset of elite mouse skills players from breaking the intended mold, because it has a certain level of inaccuracy baked into the player's performance. Simply put, beyond close contact ranges, for many weapon platforms, the full auto grouping should be wider than a human torso. And surprisingly enough, I find that at lower levels, Escape from Tarkov does a fairly good job at this. Let's watch this short clip together. It is with an unmodded AK at fairly close range. Pay attention to how the front sight post drifts to the left and right during this full auto course of fire, causing the shooter to miss his target. Interesting, eh? To me, that's a fairly reasonable representation of recoil. The problem, though, is that as the PMC levels up his skills, and with more and more Barbie attachments added to his weapons, this bloom size is greatly reduced, to the point where all the player really has to contend with is the initial muzzle rise, allowing him to land pie plate-sized groupings at very unrealistic ranges. And that seems to be the #1 cause of the full auto laser beam meta, not necessarily the muzzle rise or lack thereof. A better solution, then, may be for EFT to keep the type of muzzle deviation and travel in the game we saw in the above example, and have it continue to apply across all weapon modification levels and character skill levels. Do that, and I'm fairly certain EFT's full auto laser beam meta would die overnight, leading to much more fulfilling gunplay and player behaviors that are more authentic and engaging, where semi-auto tends to be the favored fire mode among players. Here's how that might look. So this is a diagram of full auto recoil and bloom patterns as they go through what I'm calling stages of fire. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, picture this as being the longer the player holds down the mouse button in a full auto course of fire, it progresses through those stages, right? So here we have, like on the far left, you have like games that use like a bloom only system. So it starts tight and gradually gets larger, 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 right? I'm saying this is wrong, more or less, because shooters don't tend to miss equally in all directions. Okay, now here we have the next one. We've got bloom with upward recoil. You'd see kind of that same progression of things widening out, but they track the upward motion. This is kind of what I'm showing as like the always up recoil system. We're kind of maybe following something like this. This maybe is a little bit better. At least it indicates that shooters tend to miss more on the upside to some extent. Now, I show the third one. I show a betterer, which is what I'm kind of showing more or less is where EFT kind of currently is, especially at like the super high level meta guns and super high level characters, right? So here's where we have bloom with upward recoil and the leveling that corrects, right? This is betterer because the shooters tend to initially miss high, then correct towards the initial level. And the next two I've got what I'm calling best version 1 and best version 2. These are essentially two takes on the same thing, right? Where you have the shooters initially kind of track to miss high. They correct, but with a final grouping that is not tight enough to be reliably effective beyond close contact ranges, right? So what we have is, in that first and best version 1, you see the shots track high and they kind of stay high, right? Whereas best version 2, the shots may track a little bit high, but they come back down almost to the same level, but the resulting bloom is a little bit larger than best version 1. In my mind, something like a best version 2 is would be a really good representation, right? And I mean, let's keep in mind too, this would be different. It would be like a consistent standard all the way across the board. This would differ from platforms and different calibers and stuff like that. So maybe certain weapons would tend to track more like a bloom only, whereas some would be more like a best version 2, let's say, right? So again, it depends on how much felt impulse, we'll go back to the shooter, it would dictate kind of how much rise there needs to be. If the devs want a more concrete, hands-on example, then I'd advise them to check out the original old-school Rainbow Six series. Red Storm Entertainment, its developers, clearly indicated that this is the sandbox they want players to play in. And commensurate with that expectation, these are the rules, if you will, surrounding player movement, shooting accuracy, all that kind of stuff. And a big part of how that was accomplished was through a very precise and intentional use of bloom mechanics, rather than the sort of active player management that comes with always-up recoil systems. To this day, I feel that the original Rainbow Six and its sequels, along with Ghost Recon, are one of the hallmarks in how to properly influence player behavior to set the tone of what a game seeks to accomplish and the situation it seeks to express to its players. Were they perfect? No, they had their shortcomings as well, mostly due to rather simplistic health and damage systems. This is why most players opted for the small and compact MP5K submachine gun in R6, for example. But when it comes to studying what influences player behaviors and decisions, it may provide an excellent base for BSG to build from. Rather than give players the freedom to shoot like a Terminator and bunny hop like morons to safety, those titles said, hell no, not in this kill house you're not. You don't like it, Twinkle Toes? Then don't play it. This is about tactics and planning, not about being your own unique snowflake and making a highlight reel of your, oh my god, is this what it's like to be a unicorn? Back-to-back 360 no-scope meta plays. Instead, you've got to learn to outclass your peers in other ways. And for my money, that is a dose of reality that would send EFT over the top, further cement its unique place as a self-proclaimed hardcore realistic battle simulator, and help it really stand out among the sea of generic arcadist shooters. And just another little word to the wise here, a little factoid. I know there's a lot of people that say that the Always Up is a realistic depiction of recoil, but that's simply not true. In real life, when a shooter is braced for recoil, the recoil, first of all, is going straight back into the shooter. It's the explosion, the recoil tube, the buffer, all this kind of buffer spring and stuff, everything is going straight back into the shoulder. The fact that anything kind of rises a little bit has to do with how, due to deficiencies in the shooter's stance, his posture, his body, when it takes that recoil, it naturally kind of tips upward, right, from the shooter's body, not because the weapon is tipping upward. Now, it's a little bit different. If we're talking about a rifle, that makes sense because everything goes back into the buttstock, right? That's up against the shoulder. If we're talking something more like a handgun, a pistol, it's a little bit different because the backstrap and the web of the hand, right, is below the bore line, right. That the shooting of a handgun naturally does tend to create an upward recoil impulse, right? It does tend to flip a little bit just because of the physics of what's involved, right? But again, with the rifle, it's straight back into the shoulder, and anybody worth their salt that's braced and knows how to handle this kind of thing can be just fine, right? Now, something that could be interesting is for BSG to kind of play with this would be, again, because in real life, one of the big things when you're shooting full auto or even semi-auto for that matter, want to keep things accurate for repeat shots, is this concept of a stance, right? In games, players can move around way too easily in the sense of, in real life, it's a certain posture. You're leaning a bit forward, you bring the gun up to your eyes, everything's ready to go to absorb these impulses. It's very hard to move as fluidly and like ballerina-esque as you see in games and stuff, and even a lot of movies, is because to keep this kind of posture, it's more of a regimented, more of a contained type of approach. I mean, anybody who's trained in this kind of stuff, you can go watch some videos of some good shooters doing this, you'll see what I'm talking about. And so something that BSG could explore with is maybe they say when a player comes to a stop and brings up his sights, there's a small, let's call it a little time window or delay period of like letting the player settle, right? So like if he wants to be able to be braced for the fire and be able to keep his gun level, he needs to wait just a little bit to let his player get in that position. If he fires it off too early, just stops on a dime and just starts shooting, because his character is not braced yet, maybe it would have more vertical rise right to it. That could be an interesting way to kind of bring in this kind of give and take, this trade-off that hits shooters in real life. All right, and that about does it for this one. Thanks for watching. You guys and gals stay safe. Catch you next time. Adios.